we need to have conversations and we need to understand that it's okay to talk about mental health. It's a very important topic. And I remember as a little girl, when I used to go to my grandparents' home, I used to see this man walking down the street and he was talking to himself, and everybody just said, like, ignore him, stay away from him. By the time I got to middle school, I found out that person was actually a cousin of mine, and I never knew it because our family had, like, they made an unspoken pact to make him invisible. And so one of the things I've always cherished about my family was that sense of community and support, and he didn't have any of that. And unfortunately, he did, pass away in an abandoned building in a house fire just by himself. And, years later, one of his brothers said that that was his biggest regret, that he didn't address it, he didn't talk about it, and maybe if he had given him that helping hand, or we had had those conversations and pulled him into our family, that maybe there might have been a different outcome. So I'm here for the Kennys of the world, for your cousins, my cousins, your brothers, your neighbors. That's why I'm here.
We got one. So I'm Darlene Peters, and it was a good question to me because I really, really never thought about it. Like, why did I get into mental health? I knew I was interested in disorders. The human mind has always fascinated me. But when asked the question yesterday, I really had to sit down like, what? But then I remember as a little girl, my cousin, it was one of my cousins that I looked up to. He always had the best dress. He always had the best cars. He had his own construction business. And I remember as a little girl, and it's crazy how you forget stuff. But I remember all my cousins my age, we used to just gather around him. When he drove up, he was our celebrity. That was because that's all we knew, because he was on the road for a black man to be a success. And then one day, he drove himself off a cliff. And so nothing else was said. I was thinking, like, I remember going to the funeral. I remember everybody gathering, but we never talked about what happened. And so I think that started my path because I knew that something had to be wrong because who would drive themselves off a cliff, as a small child. But as an adult now, I realized that he suffered from depression. And that wasn't until, I swear, probably 2019 when my oldest sister and me was talking about him and she shared that. But because, you sworn to secrecy in your family that maybe could have helped some other cousins of mine that struggled, I realized that, it's time for me to take a platform with my family to let them know, what, it's okay not to be okay.
Hi, I'm I'm Aaron Ray again. Why mental health is important to me. I grew up in the segregated South, and I happened to live not far from where the four girls got blew up in the church, and I would not go to church, and nobody understood it. I would not go. I would get whoopings, I would get beatings, whatever you want to call it, but I would not go to church. And I knew at some ways, I knew something was wrong with me at that point. And then so as I was growing up, I had a cousin, his name was Greg. He was developmentally delayed, but they considered him crazy. And in the states of Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia, you are treated quite differently when that is, when you're labeled that way. At the time, they were doing electric shocks, cattle prods, fighting each other for money and things of that nature. And many times when people went into institution like that, 30 to 40% of them never made it out. So I've always had an interest in, mental health. Also from when I moved up here to Cleveland, and Betsy Metzenbaum was right across the street. And the girls would run away, the guys would run away, and, they would give them cigarettes and weed and stuff like that. And a guy named Mr. Johnson, he came over and talked to us and said, that's not the way. They have problems. What can you do to help them? And from that little speech that he gave me, I decided I was going to do this type of work, from being a school teacher to this case management thing.
Thank you, thank you. So we're gonna move on. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. I promise I'm going to get it together. I absolutely promise. Okay. So our next topic is going to be help seeking in the Black community.
So I decided that this was a good topic to kind of talk about a little bit because we don't talk about why Black people don't seek help in the mental health field. And typically, Black people are more likely to go to churches, barbershops, and salons, nail salons as well, to talk about their problems, to get that support from people that look like them. But when Black people do get help, they're more likely to get help through calling an emergency department. And that typically leads to stereotypes, misdiagnosis, and other disadvantages. There are other reasons for Black people not seeking help is because a lot of mental health providers lack cultural sensitivity. African Americans, when they come, they feel marginalized, they're resistant. They would rather use their community and spiritual support instead of medical or psychiatric treatment, even though it is critical for their care.
All right. And then we're going to have Julia talk about African American history.
Yeah, feel free to chime in, Aaron.
Huh?
Feel free to chime in anytime.
Oh, sure. Oh, I got some.
So I feel like we want to talk about the history because I believe that in order to move forward, sometimes we have to look back and see where we were and where we're going. So you can't really talk about mental health in the Black community without talking about racism because they're married in a lot of ways. So when we think about the institution of slavery, around the 1700s, the prevailing thought was that Black people couldn't even have mental health because their brains weren't complex enough. After all, they didn't own property, and that was more of a white man's burden. So that was just like totally just dismissed that Black people could even have the capacity to have it. And then when we kind of move forward into the 1800s, there was a physician named Samuel Cartwright who published an article who said Black slaves did indeed have mental health. It was called drapetomania. And that meant that when you have the nerve to feel like you wanted to flee slavery, you had a mental illness. Because you want, like your slave owners, they feed you, they provided you with work so you'd be productive, so why would you flee? And the treatment for that was whippings. So that was the prevailing thought that kind of circulated in this publication throughout the South in the 1850s. And so as we move ahead and you think about slavery and what it did to the Black family. So you get married when you're allowed. And in slavery times, like we think we can meet a partner and we can do till death do us part. In slavery, it was till distance do us part. Because we understood that at any given time, my husband can get sold off and I'll never see him again. My children can get taken away from me, never to be seen again. I don't know if they're alive or dead. But then I have to turn around and take care of the same children of the person who took my family away from me. So just kind of like marinate on that a little bit and think about, can you imagine, not being able to see your children or your spouse to no fault of your own? You love this person and they love you and you're not allowed to see them and you have no control over it. Like, I don't even know the emotional capacity to even deal with that. And so when Lavette talks about these help-seeking behaviors, that started in slavery because I didn't have a therapist I can go to. So my community, my other slaves, they become my family, and we had to redefine what family meant because now my family has been ripped from me. So, maybe that lady at the next shack is now my mother because my mother is gone. And so we had to constantly recreate and rebuild what family meant for us and to provide that support to carry through. So as we moved out of slavery, it didn't get any better because as we moved into the 20th century, there's other things that took place. So we had the concept of eugenics that was happening, where if you were deemed less than or not good enough, women were sterilized. And Alabama and North Carolina had a notorious history. They went on from the 1700s into late as the 1970s, where that took place, where North Carolina, 85% of their sterilizations were Black women. So we had that happening. And Aaron?
Well, just coming up a little bit further to the Jim Crow era, growing up in Alabama, knowing about Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia, having a mental illness, they will send you to the infamous Bryce Hospital in Alabama. Notorious for lobotomies, notorious for hanging you up and beating you with a whip. And it was just so dangerous that, your family fell right into it. My mother was the youngest of 14. We had a very large family. We would have family reunions, and we had 3 or 4 cousins that, they had mental illness and developmental issues, and they weren't allowed to come to the family reunion. They stayed at home. They didn't come out to my grandfather's farm. He had 40 or 50 acres. They didn't come out to ride the horses. They stayed at home. Wherever they lived at, they stayed there. And that's just the thing, and it also was used as a weapon against minorities on the racism thing, because that was during the civil rights era where this would happen. You would go to jail. They would put you in jail. They would ask you a question like, because of my uncles, they were involved with the civil rights era. They would ask them questions. Do you want to go to Bryce or do you want to go to jail? And the answer was, I will go to jail. And they did plenty in the inhumanity. I mean, I think it was, from what I knew and from what I seen with my cousin, who could tell you the name of all the Cleveland Indians from 1971 all the way up to 1995. He could talk to you just as natural, born and whatever. They put him in them places. Now, at this very time, I have no idea where he is. Last time I seen him, he couldn't talk. He couldn't speak. So mental health, a lot of this you get from your grandparents and your great-grandparents that migrated northward, because, having a mental health illness is a weakness. You're not strong. There's no such thing as mental health. It's that boy is crazy or that girl is crazy. There's no such thing as mental health. So what do? It's hard to say, because that is so ingrained in us that we rarely ask for help. And so it's always been my thing, because I had a lot of questions. It was a lot of things I wanted to know about why this was this or that was that. And the biggest thing to find out and understand, what we do is, not everybody, I'm making a generalization here, but when we're having mental health issues, we smoke drugs, we smoke drugs, we get drunk, we become violent, we do all kind of things. As you notice now with the younger kids, they smoking wet mixed with, with crack. They call that speedballing, racing and chasing the dragon, all of that. And the main reason I talk to some that have PCP issues, and it's to forget. It's to forget the pain that has been inflicted upon them by their parents. And then by the stuff we did. I'm old enough, I have grandkids, great-grandkids. And a lot of people that I know that are grandparents, they virtually tortured their kids. And we right now, to this very day, we're complaining like, it's not like, oh, yes it is. It's the exact same. It's just done a different way. So the historical perspectives are, play a crucial part in the passing of the problem from your grandparents to your parents to you some of you great-grandparents. But it's a historical issue that we've still failed to address properly. Thank you.
So I want to add to what Aaron was saying about that generational passing down. And so there's a term for that. It's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so that's when you experience trauma throughout each generation that passes down, and it affects all Black individuals. People who experience this much trauma are a greater risk for developing other mental health issues, as well as having more severe symptoms because of it.
So I was just going to add to Aaron, because I come from the era of church would solve all my problems. I remember going to my mom, I don't know, so many times, and her only answer to me was pray, pray, pray. And, and as I started growing up, I started getting mad at her. And I'm like, Mom, it got to be something more than that. What is going on? Pray, pray, pray. But that's all she knew. That followed her from generation to generation. We went to church my father drove the church bus. So we went to church at 8:00 in the morning, and we didn't get home till 9:30. That's why I never liked working on Mondays to this day. School on Mondays, it was like I didn't go. After I got about 16, I told her I can't do it no more, because that's how it was. You stayed in church all day till all night. We had multiple services. Then as you got older, you realize like I need something more, because I still have feelings. I still get brokenhearted. I do trust God, Mama, but I might need a little bit more help, but in my father's mind, he come from an era, if you cry, you're weak. And he raised me and my sisters exactly like men. Even our husbands would say, your daddy raised y'all like men. Y'all very unemotional, y'all don't need anybody. But just, relating to Aaron, that's how he raised us. You depend on you and God. It's you and God. That's it, and if you cry, then you were considered weak. And so we grew up with that. And, it's unhealthy not to cry. You should be allowed to cry. But those are things that are passed to our generations throughout the years. His father was like that. He was like that. I know my father loved me. But as far as that hugging and all of that, oh, no. And so, no, you didn't do that. Like today, if he would see all his great grands and how much I hug on them, and he would just be like, what the heck? But, he would have to transform, because now I know better. So I do better, and I treat them better, and I check in with them every day. I check in with my grandkids. I got 13 of them, and most of them are boys. And I want them to understand that just because you are growing into a young man, you're going to feel things. And it's okay to cry. Don't listen to that because of the stigma that has been like that cloud over us, what we should do, what we can't do. And so I don't want to bring that, somebody got to break the chain somewhere, and so that's why like mental health is so important to me, because you need more than church. You got to have a balance of stuff. You find you a good therapist or a counselor, and it's okay to go to these people and seek the help that you need.
Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna move into the origin of mistrust for African Americans and Black people.
So even though this study happened so many years ago, it is still impactful for African Americans and their trust in the medical field, the mental health field. This study was the Tuskegee syphilis study. This is where 60 poor Black African American men were tested on as guinea pigs. They were told that they were being in this trial for bad blood, and they were given food, they were given burial insurance. They were not informed of what the trial actually was about, and that they were trying to find a cure for syphilis. Later on, they found the cure for syphilis, which was penicillin. They did not get that cure for syphilis and they died. And because of that, they got reparations and they were able to get medical insurance passed down to their family. And even though they were able to get all those things, it still left an impact on Black people and why they don't go seek help. This can be seen in the HIV and AIDS epidemic. This can be seen in COVID, where we didn't want to get the vaccination because we felt like we were going to be tested on. We didn't know what it was. We wanted other people to try it first before we even thought about getting it. There was a lot of fear around it. This study hits more home than I realized. A few years ago, after talking with my grandfather, he let me know that his father was actually a participant in the Tuskegee syphilis study, and he actually died. And so for me, I was like, that's only like 2 generations away. Like, that's not far away to hear that happened. And all my grandfather got from that was reparations, a check that now would be nothing, would not be able to get us anything. And that's it.
Going along those lines, I was going to school then. Quite a few of my fraternity brothers and whatnot, their grandparents were part of the Tuskegee experiment. And I remember this young lady on campus, she was from Tuskegee, and she happened to come down. This was before HIV. She came down with the herpes virus. Boy, did you see that? You should have seen the change on that campus. You know, it was a big change. Nobody was like, if you were from Tuskegee, you were an outcast. Now, what are the odds of everybody from Tuskegee having herpes? But boy, it was a thing. And also, when we went to school, they said because we as Black people were a little bit more promiscuous than others, they actually put saltpeter in our grits or food. So we just stopped, breakfast, no, not gonna have it. So, it's a lot of things like that. It's historical, things of that nature. You just feel ways and you just can't, sometimes you just can't shake it. But as I'm going to be the grandparent that's going to break the chain with my grandson, as Darlene said, and let him know there are different ways he can cry. He can cry and it's not, you don't have to, I don't tell him to shut up. Don't cry. Take this. I don't punch him in the chest. I don't whip him with the extension cords and things of that nature, because that had a big effect on my parents and grandparents because they were treated that way. And they thought that was the right way to be treated. They had got that negative self-image and they were treated like that. My grandfather had 75 acres of land. My 2 uncles got into it with a white guy and they wind up killing him. They gave them the option to you forfeit all your land and your 2 sons leave and never come back here and we'll let them live. That took away from all our little family, little history and stuff that we had, that we could have lived off of, the farm and all of that. And they just took it. And along with this mental illness, and I understand my grandparents, I really do, because they had to do things to survive. And all of that is historical, it is passed down once again. And then when people say, well, Black people racist, sure. But I think we're more prejudiced, some of us, because you have to have power to be racist. The judge is racist. I can be the guy that live in the projects and be prejudiced, but what difference is that gonna make to your life? It's not gonna change your life any. But if that judge tell me I got to do 99 years for doing something that I may get a year for, I should have gotten a year for, that's going to make a difference. And then I'm going to be angry. And then once I get angry, I'm going to start trying to find ways to satisfy that anger. Okay, so maybe I start doing crack. Maybe I start doing heroin. Maybe I start doing PCP. It's just things, it's just historical. So I understand the work that we do and the help that a lot of our clients need, because I have mostly older guys and stuff, and I can understand the things that they went through, the things they've gone through, and I can understand the younger ones. I went to a meeting, we had this maybe about 12 or 13 years ago, and they were talking about it's called, I think it's Cortisol. That's a type of let me see, how can I put this? It's something that grows up in your body, younger people, and it makes them angry. It affects their health, it affects their mental health, and it's oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, okay. And it affects their mental health, it affects their physical health. It's just a thing, because a lot of times, I'm sure plenty of us in here have asked, why those kids so angry? They're angry because of the things that happened to them. You're too young.
Our next topic is going to be the Black experience with schizophrenia and how it impacts the Black community.
So when we think about schizophrenia in the Black community, I want to point out that Black people are diagnosed with schizophrenia spectrum disorders at a higher rate than their white counterparts. Black individuals suffering from psychotic disorders may not be able to access treatment or be punished just because they are ill. Most times when Black individuals who have these symptoms related to schizophrenia, their first entry point can be with the law enforcement system. And so instead of going into the medical system and getting the treatment that they might need, they're going into these prisons and being incarcerated. And when they have this record for being in the jails and the prisons, they're less likely to ever get treatment. So to add to the incarceration and the perception of being ill, they also face mistrust from mental health providers in the Black community. They're less likely to have their symptoms be perceived as other appropriate diagnoses, such as mood disorders, depression, because most mental health providers may see that resistance or their mood shifts as schizophrenia instead of actually asking more questions and getting a better understanding of what their life experience is, other factors. And so instead they'll diagnose them with a schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Most times when they are prescribed medication, they're either going to be prescribed a higher dose than is needed, or they're going to be prescribed outdated medication instead of the first generation medications. Black people may have more trouble getting treatment when they have schizophrenia because of the stigma surrounding mental health. A lot of people who come to our centers, from my personal experience, don't even want to hear the word schizophrenia. They don't want to believe that they have it or that their child has it. And from my experience working on the first episode team, a lot of families come in there and they're afraid. They're like, please don't tell me that this is what my child has or my family member has. And having to get that education is really important because they don't know that, this doesn't make them crazy. This doesn't make them not be able to have a meaningful, impactful life.
Thanks, Lavette. One of the clients I work with that always stayed with me was a young man, African American male, who had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, which he rejected that diagnosis. And this was a gentleman who had every stressor you could possibly imagine, from the generational poverty, the law enforcement, victim of crime. He had been shot twice right in front of his home. He didn't have resources just to up and move to another neighborhood, so he had to stay where he was. So he said, I was always hyper vigilant because I don't know if it's going to happen again. Um, and so when he came through the agency, not this agency, but he came through the agency, he was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Not once was he ever assessed for post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, you imagine somebody being shot twice in front of their home where they should feel safe. And so, and this man actually like broke down in tears, you know, with me. And that was a lot because even at the time he just said like, I'm sorry, I'm not weak, because Black men don't cry. That's what they're taught. And so when we talk about schizophrenia and that misdiagnosis and the stereotypes of like how Black men are supposed to be this ideal of strength 24/7 and to view mental health as being weak, and for him to like almost buck against getting treatment because of how he was treated and the misdiagnosis, like he's one of the stories that I kind of always carry with me, that I've worked with in the past.
So I wanted to add one more thing. As you were sharing that story, it made me think about a client that came in and they literally cried because they were like, I'm so glad to see so much representation on the team. And they were just so surprised that I was a Black woman and was able to look like what her daughter looked like. And she said, I wouldn't have even come here if it wasn't for you. I wasn't gonna get my daughter treatment because I didn't think anyone was going to look like her and understand her and be compassionate and understand all the things that their family went through. And so that like stuck with me because it was like that representation matters so much, especially with people who have the diagnosis of schizophrenia, because they don't get the right treatment. They don't get that compassion, that empathy. It's just, oh, you're crazy, or, oh, you just use drugs. It's not with care.
Okay. And now we're going to hear a bit about how stereotypes and euphemisms have been weaponized against the Black community.
Thank you, Monet.
You're welcome.
A lot of times we hear about stereotypes about Black people, and a lot of times they are used to justify the violence and oppression that have occurred. But as being a resilient community, we take sometimes those stereotypes and we make them a positive. So when we hear that the strong Black woman, we wear that as a shield of armor sometimes because, you know, I am strong, I can handle this. But it also hurts us when it comes to mental health because then we don't get the treatment because we say things like, my relatives, my ancestors, they survived slavery. I should surely handle this. Or we tap dance around the subject of mental health. We don't have direct conversations about it. We come up with these like little phrases that really don't get to the heart of matter. His elevator doesn't go all the way to the top, or I'm just stressed, I'm just tired. But we really don't talk about mental illness, what it is. We don't put a face on it. We don't talk about what it is, how we can get through it, what we can do together to support each other when we're going through it. So I've heard like many phrases like to kind of tap dance and justify around it. I'm sure you have too. And it's like, this is kind of like words do matter. You know, when you're younger, you talk that sticks and stones, don't break words, words never hurt me, but they do. Words hurt, words matter. So even as we're engaging people who talk about mental health, our words matter, how you approach, how you're referring to people, the words that you use. They're not a schizophrenic, they're a person living with the schizophrenic disorder. So we can't call people a bipolar. We can't use bipolar as a punchline in jokes because then that diminishes what bipolar is and the people who are living with it, and it further puts that barrier between us and getting treatment for it. And so a lot of times we need to think about the kinds of comments that we make around mental health so that we can change that dynamic and make a U-turn. So it's like, it's okay that you're living with this. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're less than, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You know, you have an issue. We have ways to support you. You can still live a quality life living with this disorder. But I think a lot of times we can get kind of stuck with those comments that we make and those phrases that we choose when we're talking about mental health, and it becomes a plaything. It becomes a joke instead of like, these are real lives, and like we need to put real faces to it, real names, and have those direct conversations.
I agree. I do. Oh, no, Aaron, want to say something?
Well, also, we've learned the terms. I'm schizo. He's bipolar. He's paranoid. Those are the people that have those symptoms, and they use them. They use them as excuses to permeate their violence a lot of times. Like I was just looking at this paper, it said Truesdale 206 study that people that are paranoid schizophrenic are more violent than others because of their ability to retain, plan, and do other things to perpetuate the stereotype. That's one thing we have to get rid of. We can't call him, well, he's just schizo. Oh, he's just bipolar. Like I said, the general neighborhood has picked up those terms. And when you call somebody schizo, you may get schizo behavior back. You know, you may take a beating or something along those lines. The guys that smoke wet, call them wet heads and things of that nature. Well, if you call them a wet head, what do people that smoke PCP normally do? They have excessive strength like Superman. They do all types of things, and they will call you out as a target. So let's not call them wet heads. Let's not call them schizo. Let's not call them bipolar, because that's just giving them an excuse to do their thing that they do.
I agree. I really do agree. So we've heard a lot about the Black experience and our mistrust of mental health services and why we don't talk about it. So now we get to hear about how we can discuss mental health in the Black community.
So, a way that we can talk about mental health in the Black community or with individuals who are Black as providers is being more culturally responsive and providing culturally responsive care. This is about desensitizing mental health and understanding that everyone's experience is different. So, in order for us to develop cultural humility, we must be self-aware. We must reflect on ourselves, our understanding, our values, and what makes us who we are, and maybe our own biases as individuals. We should think about our values and others. So we should always be curious. We should always wonder about the other person, their culture, their life experience, and we should respond with authenticity and be able to ask questions about that, like their experience. Lastly, we should be able to grow. We should be comfortable with being uncomfortable, being able to have uncomfortable conversations, and acknowledging that we might not know everything, we might not know what every person has experienced. As a Black therapist and leader, I think it's important for us to think about how we can challenge ourselves, to think about others' values, worldview, upbringing, and other things, and how it influences clients' perception of us, how it impacts our rapport with them, and how it may influence our clients' perception of the care that we provide. So in order for us to do that, we must ask ourselves, are we being tolerant, inclusive, or integrative? Being tolerant is acknowledging there are differences between you and your client or patient. Inclusivity is asking them their social identities and their cultural background and considering it in the conceptualization when you're working with that client. So if you're working with that client and you're giving them a diagnosis or you're trying to figure out what mental health diagnosis they best fall under, you want to think about their social identity. You want to think about other cultural backgrounds that they have. And in order to be integrative, you're going to do all of the above. This includes having a space in your office that is reflective of different cultures, having forms, intake forms, screeners that include multiple languages. The purpose of cultural responsive care is demonstrating integrative care. Anybody else got anything to add?
So, and for me, I like the fact that, and the part that I took most as in, how can we help? How can we change? I mean, we've gotten better, but we can get much better. And so looking at that is, how do we change the narrative? So suggestions have been made by the way that mental illness is projected. You know, when we watch them on TV, when we watch it on a film, you know, we have relatives, like Julia was saying, we'll be like, oh, they elevator never go through the top, you know, or the same as what Aaron Ray was saying as well. But us, how we portray our own relatives, you know, that could negatively impact them. You know, if we think they ill, then what are we going to do to help? And if we're not going to help, you know, my mom used to always say, if you don't have nothing good to say, everybody knows.
Don't say it at all.
Nothing at all.
That's right. And maybe we should practice that, because like Julia said, words do hurt. And maybe they don't hurt. They won't hurt us because they're not directed at us. But if we use those words and we're saying that to our relative, to our friends, or making sure that when we're talking about a client, making sure you're in a private environment. It's not, I mean, I remember being at a hospital on the west side, and the nurses was in the elevator, and clearly this lady had a mental illness, and they didn't realize that her people was on that elevator. And that turned into a really big thing, you know, but making sure that when we speak about people who is around us, and should we be saying that anyway? We should be questioning ourselves, because if I'm supposed to be helping you, then I shouldn't be saying nothing negative about you. So that would be my, like, what I try to bring here at work. You know, when I see my Black young men and they're devastated, and, you know, they're telling me like, Miss Peters, I was in college, I was doing well, and then this happened, you know, but also it states that we should be showing them how to, that they can live. You know, you can live with bipolar, you can live with schizophrenia, but there is some work that you are going to have to do, and us promoting them to work at it, not us do it for them, but promoting that you can do this. Take charge of your life. And I think that sometimes, I think with myself, I always wonder, like, make sure I don't drop the ball, that I'm following up with those clients, that I'm saying, hey, where's your medication? You know, why did you stop? Making sure that we are connected as an agency, saying this client is not taking their medication. What can we do? You know, because if we step up our game, I think that we will definitely see a lot more progress in that area where we, you know, we're always talking about the Black communities, but sometimes I guess it's time for us to stop talking about it and just be about it. Like, we should just definitely be like Nike and just do it.
I know that's right. We got about
What-
10 minutes.
Oh, I'm
No, you sure?
Oh, I'm shorter than that. Along the same lines, you know, your friends may ask you like, what'd you do at your job? And they be like, oh, he messed with those crazy people. The first thing I do is tell them, you're not crazy, because you're just one incident from being in that same boat. So if I can get my friends to understand what I do and how I do it, maybe they can stop making fun of what's her name or what's his name. I have a friend, he's a younger guy, he's a twin. He smoked PCP, and he had aphasia, and everybody thought that was so funny. And I was like, man, that is not funny. You know, he couldn't talk. We couldn't understand what he was saying. I'm saying, you just one overdose from the same thing. You never know what can happen. Somebody could put something in your drink. So you want us to laugh at you as you go through your suffering? So just getting people to understand what you do and how you do it and how serious it is for you, for what you think and what you do, I think that'll help also.
Yes, you did a little bit, but but no, it's fine. You talked about the future the future of mental health in the Black community. So we do have a couple minutes if you want to add anything. If not, then we'll just jump to Q&A. All right, well, they're good. So we'll do a quick Q&A. If anybody has any questions, raise your hands, and we'll make sure. Yes, Aaron, what's your question?
It's a simple question. How many people know the difference between a sanitarium and an asylum? Raise your hand.
Are you about to tell us?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
They're the same exact thing. But if they say I'm sending you to the insane asylum, that means it's state run and you're gonna have hell. If they're gonna send you to a sanatorium, it's private and you might get better care. So it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
Thank you for that, Aaron. We appreciate it. Yeah, so there are mics on the table. You press the button, ask your question. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
So we talked a lot about like the future and what we can do as providers. And my question to you guys is, we gave you a lot of examples of things we can do, but do you guys have anything that we didn't mention that you could implement while working with clients?
That's a good question. We have a lot of mental health providers in here and non-mental health. Thank you, Adrian. Go ahead.
So I'm not a mental health provider. I'm a grants manager, but I just listened to like 3 different TED Talks about how, and we know this at the centers, but like the traditional form of healthcare where you only ask about physical symptoms is like, that's all you ask about. I think this concept of like holistic care, do you have enough food? Are you okay at home? Are you safe? What else is, what is your relationship like with your spouse? Or those different questions, asking about holistic health, I feel like is a direction that I know the centers is trying to go that direction, and it's exciting. So that's all I have.
Thank you, because I love a good TED Talk, and you're right. Those basic necessities definitely do drive your mental health, for sure. I'm sorry, I used to work in mental health, so I have a little bit of an opinion. I see you, Leon. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to say thank you all for discussing this topic. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to see the attendance, and I think it was a much needed topic. So thank you. I want to thank the Black Affinity Group for putting this on. This is awesome. As we move, as the centers, we're trying to move toward a more integrated care model. And I think, Adrian just kind of, touched on it a little bit. But what I'm thinking about is there's research that suggests that past trauma definitely has, not only mentally has mental impacts on your health, but it impacts you physically when we see things like how stress can lead to hypertension, diabetes, things of that nature. So I'm just wondering from a mental health professional perspective, what type of discussions need to happen between you and primary care professionals to make sure that you're addressing all aspects of client health?
That's a really good question. I think when it comes down to that, as a therapist and me, I think about like the conversations that we should have is, making sure that they are not only just asking those personal questions about like what your life is like at home, your needs and all those other things, but making sure that they're a little more culturally competent to know like stress in the Black community is much higher. That is going to lead to hypertension. And so just kind of having that ongoing conversation. As a therapist, I might see something where I'm like, oh, my client is stressed out because they lost their job or they don't have food at home. And I notice that they're starting to have different types of symptoms or they score higher on this screener. Let me reach out to that primary care provider and say, hey, these are the things that I noticed. And that primary care provider being more receptive and saying like, okay, how can we move forward with this particular client? I don't think there's a generalized answer for that, but I think that communication between providers is going to be like pivotal for that one client or the mass clients that we serve.
And to that same point, I think primary care professionals need to notice the warning signs, the red flags, and find a way to establish some kind of pipeline for their patients to access whatever mental health and social services that they may need to improve not only their physical but mental health.
So as you were speaking, I started thinking about, being like when we talk about that cultural competence, and knowing that people who are Black are going to be less likely to talk about their stressors, to talk about their problems, because of the fact that there's a stereotype that we're going to be weak if we talk about those things, especially Black men. Black men have the weight of the world on their shoulders. They're not going to say, oh, I'm stressed out because I got to provide provide money for my, like food for my family and the money and pay all the bills. They're going to feel like that's what they're supposed to do and that they shouldn't be stressed about those things. So being able to have conversations around that and knowing how to broach it, because some people aren't going to be open to talking about it because they're going to be like, oh, that's not a stressor for me. And I'll maybe identifying what stressors are for those individuals as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions, comments, concerns? No? Yes.
So I have a son who's 6 years old, and oftentimes my brother, who is an ex-Marine, and my husband, I find them saying, don't cry, stop acting like a girl. How do you, like, as a mom, I tell them, one, shut up, because he can cry, because he's allowed to, because he's human. But what would be your recommendation or some tools you have to like kind of combat that and not make it like me against the males in our family? What would you say to that? Like advice, please.
I know we got some moms up here that probably had that conversation.
I'm not a mom, but I worked with children for like most of my therapeutic career as a therapist. And I think it's kind of hard when you have that family pushback saying like, oh, he needs to be tough. Oh, he can't cry because that's how they were raised. But, having that conversation, like it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to have feelings. And maybe even like he might not cry about when he's sad, but being able to provide him a space to talk about some of those problems might be helpful. And then eventually he might start to understand like it is okay to talk about emotions. It's okay if I'm sad. It's okay if I cry.
And I always thought like you can have the both of both worlds with a mom and a dad. That's why you got a mom and you got a dad. The dad has his perspective of how he sees his son. And then of course we have our perspective, how a mother and a son is. And with my son, I validate his father on one point, but I also say, but if you're not feeling that way and those tears do need to come, you're okay. You don't worry about what other people say at some point in your life, because sometimes, you got to go against the grain. Just because daddy said do it this way, don't necessarily make it right, because as I grew up, I learned that some of the things my parents taught me, it wasn't right. It just wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And that's how I tried to instill in him, you're going to grow up to be your own man. And it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay. I always tell them feelings are neither wrong or right, but it's the actions behind the feelings. And I wanted to be the one to teach him how to appropriately behave when I get angry. I don't want you to have to go punch or cuss somebody out. You don't have to do that when you get angry. It's other ways. So, I always intervene and try to show him the other ways to do things,
And I just want to add really quick, because we're about at time, but I think that exposure for the older men in the Black community is important too, because they're still stuck in this way of thinking, and I think that they need to be softened up a bit. And I think that if they get exposure to mental health services themselves or through media, whatever the case may be, if them and their friends start talking about it more, then that idea may change a bit. All right, so we're at time. I want to thank our panelists for being here and providing a great deal of enriching information. Yes. And we want to thank you all for coming.
Shameless plug. Next week we have Jeopardy on, what is it, the 26th?
Okay. Good job, y'all.
Or the 27th for the Black African American. Yeah, next Tuesday, same time, 12 o'clock. Bring your teams. And Thursday, we have a discussion about Divine Nine. So Tuesday and Thursday, you're with us next week at 12 o'clock. Thanks.
could have said it.